The State Department plays a leading role in the United States' efforts to defeat ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other terrorist groups around the world. Our country's fundamental objective is to degrade the terrorist threat to a level where it's capable of being countered by civilian authorities. That's why we're partnering with civilian authorities, from Justice and Interior ministers to border and aviation security officers to police departments around the world, to develop whole-of-government responses to terrorism. Much of this work is being done through the Global Counterterrorism Forum, the GCTF, and I'll highlight some of its important work in a moment. But first, it's important for us to understand the nature of the terrorist threat we face and how it's evolving and adapting. In the past few years, terrorists increasingly have begun to attack soft targets, restaurants, cultural sites, and stadiums where people gather to shop and dine and transact business. These places are designed to be open and inviting. That makes them attractive to visitors, but it also makes them vulnerable to terrorists. We've seen this deadly trend in places like Barcelona, Berlin, Jakarta, Ouagadougou, London, Manchester, and Nice. We've also seen it here at home in the United States, in places like Orlando and San Bernardino. To address this problem, the GCTF launched an initiative in 2016 on the protection of soft targets in a counterterrorism context, which the United States co-chaired with Turkey. Our efforts led to the so-called Antalya Memorandum, which was endorsed yesterday at the GCTF Ministerial. This document offers guidance to governments and private industry alike as they develop policies, practices, and programs to protect citizens and potential soft targets from terrorist attacks. For instance, we're calling on governments and private sector entities to develop better protocols for the sharing of information relevant to the protection of soft targets. We're also calling on governments to conduct a continuous process of risk assessment to prioritize the targets that are most likely to face problems. The United States will build these and other good practices into our foreign capacity building and training programs. I've urged our partners to do the same. Let me briefly highlight a few other GCTF initiatives that were announced at yesterday's ministerial. One is the Families Initiative, which focuses on the families of foreign terrorist fighters who've come home from the war zone in Syria and Iraq. Some of these family members may have fought on the battlefield themselves. Others may have been radicalized in the war zone. All of them will have witnessed unspeakable violence and brutality. The Families Initiative, which is being led by the Netherlands and the United States, has a number of basic goals. We want to be able to effectively assess the motivations and sympathies of returning family members. We want to tailor existing tools so we can mitigate the threat of radicalized returnees. And we want to develop a set of non-binding good practices that will serve as the basis for international engagement, assistance, and training. We're also launching a new initiative to address homegrown terrorists. Today, it's increasingly common for people who've never traveled to a conflict zone, for people who've never even joined a terrorist group, to commit deadly attacks. Inspired by public calls to violence, these self-directed terrorists turn everyday objects like kitchen knives and rental cars into lethal weapons. Along with our co-chair, Morocco, the United States will take the lead in exploring the factors that drive people to become homegrown terrorists and how to identify them before they can strike. We'll also look at how the radicalization process for homegrown terrorists may differ from that of foreign terrorist fighters. And we'll develop a new set of good practices that governments and the private sector can use to address this threat effectively. Again, the enemy we face is an adaptive one. Terrorists are constantly learning from their failures and probing for new vulnerabilities. So it's incumbent upon us to learn and adapt as well. Along with our allies and partners, the United States is leading the way in confronting this threat wherever we find it across the globe. Thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions.